All right, now let's get into the meat of the conference. I am so excited about this fireside chat that is coming up. We have an incredible conversation on how technology and AI are transforming finance. And we have an incredible host with an incredible speaker today. Up speaking will be the former chief strategy officer of Northwestern Mutual. She plays the 100-stringed instrument, the sarod, and is extremely awesome. We have Aditi, Javeri, Gokhale. Please make some noise for her. And to host this session today, from Business Insider, this man has run an ultra marathon in the Sahara Desert. So relatively speaking, this shouldn't be too terrible. Welcome our host, Matt Turner, up to the stage, everybody.
Excellent.
Oh, great. Perfect.
Morning, everyone. What is for you? I'm not there.
Do we need it?
Yeah. How about this one? This one works. There we go. We might just have to pass this back and forth.
Smoking down.
The AI digital twin nailed this, right? Seamless, and then very human challenge of getting mics working.
I can try this or not.
I can hand this back and forth. So,
Did I get another? No. Yes.
okay. Let's try again. Start again from the top. Good morning, everyone. It is a beautiful day here in New York City. I'm super excited to be here. It's a tough act to follow, an AI digital twin, but we will try. I'm delighted to be here with the very human Aditi, who I got to know in her role at Northwestern Mutual, but has had a long and successful career at a whole bunch of companies, big brand names that we will all have heard of. Of course, we're here at the MIT AI conference, and we're going to spend most of the time talking about AI. But first, I want to start a question about MIT and your MIT story, the role it played in your career and in you being here on this stage today.
So first of all, it's an honor and a privilege to be here amongst all of you. So my MIT story is, first of all, I'm born and raised in Mumbai, India, and grew up in a middle-class family. Money was tight, but happiness was in abundance. Both my parents worked in their respective careers for 40 years. And one day I was walking to my mom's office and happened to pass by the United States Education Foundation. And so went and spoke to a counselor there. She encouraged me to apply to US universities. Came back home, didn't talk to my dad about it. He's an engineer. And not because I thought he'd be upset. I knew we couldn't afford it. So spoke to my mom and my sister, who said, you should apply to US universities. So when the lights were out at night, we applied to 5 universities. One of them was MIT. We couldn't afford the application fee, which at that point for MIT was $25. So I asked for a fee waiver and went about my high school and got into MIT with a 4-year tuition grant and scholarship. And so I took my first flight ever to Boston's Logan Airport and started my wonderful journey at MIT. Now, I got to tell you, MIT is not for the faint at heart, as you all know. Not only did it teach me grit and resilience, but when I was at MIT, I did my undergrad in 3 years, and I convinced the Sloan School of Management to admit me to the business school program because I wanted to get my education all paid for. So I did my undergrad, and I'm a business school major at the Sloan School of Management. From there on, I went to American Express, Travelocity, Nutrisystem. So beyond the grit and resilience, I think the appreciation I got at MIT was around technology. And I'm not an engineer. I'm a 14-15 major. But what I realized is how critical technology is and how impactful it is to business, right? And so throughout my career, if you've noticed, I've always worked in companies where I can create a turnaround and transformation leveraging technology.
So let's talk about the technology. It was just a little less than 2 years ago that ChatGPT launched to the public. And of course, AI had been in development for many years before that. But that certainly felt like the moment where it just exploded in the public consciousness, but also the rate of development just seemed to accelerate. So how surprised have you been at the pace of change through the last few years?
So, I think before we talk about the pace of change, you've got to think about this in the broader context of sort of human advancement, right? If you think about it in the broader context of human advancement, whenever there has been human advancement, it has to happen around certain moments in history. And I'm not going to give a history lesson, but let's think about the Industrial Revolution. When that happened, the first change happened in Europe, North America, and societal changes happened over decades, right? It was not fast. It happened slowly and steadily, country by country. But then when tech cycles started to happen, they happened much faster, right? But if you think about the PC, internet, mobile, and then it's the next frontier, which is AI. And that acceleration, whether it's cloud computing, machine learning, data processing, it happened globally at the same time. The impact was all together, and the impact was across society altogether. The Industrial Revolution, it was manual labor getting automated. But if you think about AI, it has impacted decision-making. It's from a cognitive perspective. So, when people say it's the next Industrial Revolution, I've read all these articles, I don't believe that to be the case. I believe it's sort of the next intelligence revolution. That's what I think about it. I mean, it's impacting every single vertical. It's impacting creativity. It's impacting art. It's impacting music. Software is impacting intelligent labor, right? If you think about industries, now there are certain industries, retail, technology, healthcare. I think those are the ones, finance, of course. I think they have been impacted at a faster pace. But there are still certain industries, the government, unfortunately, with all the bureaucracy, mass transportation, real estate, even education, I would say, I don't think it's moved as fast. And in the broader scheme of things, I think AI is winning around replacement, but I don't think AI is winning around creating yet.
And so, given what you just described, what is your expectation for adoption going forward? Is it a step change? Is it more of an adoption curve? How do you see people increasingly using AI?
I think it's going to be an adoption curve, right? I don't think it's going to be a step change. I think it's going to be an adoption curve for two reasons, right? First, it's around the technology. If you think about the technology part of it, if you think about the LLM models in general, they're refined, they're retrained, there are improvements. Someone sort of explained it to me in terms of education levels, right? So you start with elementary level. When you have an elementary level, the basic level, it started with sort of basic pattern recognition, the first version of GPT, right? Basic pattern recognition. So it's sort of like, just sort of following tasks. Then you go into your high school level, which is, complex language sort of problem solving. Then you go into your sort of college level, master's level, which is GPT-4, which is where you have some assistance and it's sort of summarizing research and applications. But it's still not there when it comes to decision making. It's still not there around nuances and ambiguity. And so you're now thinking about the next level, which is the PhD level, which is where we're all sort of thinking about. So the technology is still not there. I mean, you just saw it even with the digital twin. There's that delta. Hello? Okay. There's still that delta. And then there's a human aspect to it, right? In terms of embracing change, humans have to be trained. Talent has to be trained. There's always, when it comes to change management, you and I have talked about this in large companies. There's a inertia. There's fear. So it's always going to be an adoption curve.
And so financial services specifically, often such as Northwestern Mutual, for example, huge company, heavily regulated industry. Many of the banks that we bank with are patched up from multiple acquisitions over many years. How is the financial services industry implementing AI as you've seen, given those challenges, given that history?
So, within financial services, now my experience in financial services, and that's a really broad term, so I can just be very candid with you. I think my experience within financial services, whether it's American Express, Northwestern Mutual, or my peers, I would say it's more around, PNC, wealth management, asset management, banking. That's sort of my area. If you think about financial services, the large companies, many of them have been around for 50, 60 years, some of them for 100 years. Now, what are they dealing with? They're dealing with large data sets, but these data sets are in silos. The left hand doesn't talk to the right hand, right? They're dealing with legacy systems and tech stacks. Some of those haven't been upgraded for many, many years. But they're also dealing with very deep business history. So dealing with large financial institutions that have pros on data, but cons in terms of the technology issues. And then you've got startups or companies that have been around for 4 or 5 years that are AI natives that have modern tech stacks, but don't have the data sets. So there's this sort of tension. And the question is, who's going to go first? Who's going to win? Who's going to get the data sets? Who's going to build the distribution and the client experience that's expected to win in this market? From a financial services perspective, I think the ones that are further along, if I have to do it the ones that have been making most progress, I think PNC, in terms of incorporating AI, I think PNC companies are further along, whether it comes to their telematic models, their claims data. Why is that? Because when it comes to underwriting for PNC companies, it's a pretty short time frame, right? In between making underwriting decisions and results, it's a very short feedback loop for PNC companies. When it comes to the next one, I think after PNC I would think it's banking. I think banking is the next one. Most of the national and regional banks, they've been incorporating AI within customer service, compliance, underwriting loans. I think they're doing a great job there. The next one, I think, would be asset management. Many of them, they've from 10 financial analysts, they're down to 2. So they're sort of creating cost efficiencies on the asset management side. They've leveraged AI in their trading models already. In fact, I just had a conversation with some of the largest asset managers in the world. They're really pumping in a lot of investments there. Next up would be wealth management. Much of the investments in AI are on the back office side. There are some wealth management companies that are focusing now on advice. Giving financial advice as an AI digital twin, so to speak, I think is still not there. Highly regulated industry, as you can imagine. There are pilots being conducted. Right now, most of the wealth management companies, they're using AI in preparing for client meetings, gathering notes, but in terms of advice, there are still pilots going on. And I think the last one is around the life insurance space. Less than 25% of life insurance policies have some form of AI. And that makes sense because the feedback loop in terms of underwriting is much longer. And many of the life insurance companies are, over 70, 80 years old.
And so for those big companies, how are they approaching it? You mentioned pilots. Is it the case that they're experimenting here and there? Do you see any of these big companies going all in on AI? How are they approaching it from a strategic
perspective? No, they're doing a test and learn approach. Many of them are doing a test. I mean, there are some that is, I think the worst would be like, we're so scared, just don't do anything, right? I mean, that's stupid, right? I think the test and learn approach is what you should do. But I think the companies that are going to go ahead would be when you're testing and learning simultaneously across multiple divisions versus doing it in silos. So that's what we're pushing for within the life insurance space.
So one of the things I've heard in conversations with executives in banking, but actually across business, is oftentimes they'll find a pilot case study where AI seems to deliver incredible efficiency gains or what have you. Right. The challenge is then scaling it, right? Because you can maybe have success on a small scale with a specific task, but then implementing that organization-wide is proving much more challenging. Have you seen any evidence of that? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, so that comes back to so here's what happens, right? So you've got pilots that prove to be within a certain organization. You've got pilots that prove to be show the cost benefit, right? But then when you want to scale those pilots within large companies, you've got different decision makers, right? Then you've got a tech stack. Back to the tech stack, you're unable to scale it. Then you have a technology roadmap that is set in stone. So you've got to maneuver a lot of challenges before scaling it through.
And I'm conscious, given the introduction, this is a focus, this event has a heavy focus on startups. So what is your message for the smaller, more dynamic companies that can potentially seek to challenge the big existing players in financial services? What are the bright spots for them? What are the benefits?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to, one of the things that I feel is going to happen in the next couple of years, and this is one of the predictions that I think is going to happen. So many of the large companies, and I've had conversations with many of the C-suite leaders, they've invested a lot over the last 2-3 years in AI, massive euphoria around AI, data scientists, engineers. And what they're starting to see is they're not starting to see the returns in terms of cost savings that they had expected, right? So they're going to start to pull back in terms of budgets, whether it is the nature of what's happening in the economy too, right? All of us know that there is possibly a recession, whether it's a soft landing, a hard landing, who knows? And so they're going to start to pull back. What that's going to do is impact startups. And so when startups are impacted, many of them have the pilots, but they may have the one contract. They may not be able to get the bigger contract. So it's going to start affecting startups. So what you've got to start to figure out is how tight and convincing is your value proposition, and how convincing is that ROI for that company to be able to then scale. So that's the conversation that's happening at the C-suite level right now, is pulling back because they're not seeing the ROI on many of these investments they're making.
And speaking of the C-suite, obviously the technically minded folks in the C-suite have been thinking about AI, I'm sure, for a long time, but that's not true for everyone across the C-suite necessarily. So how are C-suites kind of approaching AI, getting their heads around it? How are they thinking about how it can change their organization in your experience?
Yeah, so I think in large companies, I think there are a few things that absolutely have to change. There's, I talk about it in sort of 5 different ways. The first is, this is not a single transformation when it comes to large organizations. This is an entire change of an ecosystem, right? So when you think about it, as leaders in large organizations, historically, thinking about technology was delegated to a CIO or a CTO. It's his or her problem. Let's go on with our own business. Now it's the responsibility of the CEO, the board. Everyone has to lean in. Everyone has to be smart, both in terms of breadth and depth, in terms of the impact of AI to their organization. So that's the first thing. The job is on all of us as leaders to figure out what this means. The second is around talent. We've got to entirely think differently around our talent strategy, how we hire talent, how we train talent, how we create safe spaces to experiment. We can't hire talent that are order takers. They have to be risk takers. We have to partner with universities and create hubs within hometowns. So that's a different talent strategy. The third is around risk management and governance around AI. So it's not just good about investing in AI, but creating guardrails around how we think about the governance structures. The fourth is around organizational design. I think gone are the days where you say, this is my business model, this is my structure for the next 5 years, because with technology, you've got to be very dynamic in the way you think about it. But as far as financial institutions, the one currency that cannot change is trust. And so trust is the currency that cannot change. And so as long as you keep that trust with your stakeholders, brands and financial institutions that maintain that trust with their stakeholders are the ones that are going to win.
And how hard is that change management that you were just describing, all of the steps that need to be taken? Because, again, for heavily regulated, large financial services companies, essentially they're having to rebuild the plane in the air, right? To a certain degree. And one of the things I've often heard with relation to AI is the most transformative effect is if you, to your point, rethink the business model, right? I think many times these companies are tied to the way they've always done things and are just applying AI to that rather than thinking about how AI could change the whole way they operate. So how hard is that change management
Change management has to be at the center of the conversations you're having. The ones that do it at the end are the ones that actually are not going to progress.
Interesting. And how are you keeping up to date on AI, by the way, I have to ask?
By being at conferences like this one. I'm here to learn as much as, I'm kicking this off and I'm going to be sitting through all the sessions to learn.
But do you feel like your colleagues in the C-suite are doing the same, or is it?
Some are, some aren't. Many of them are afraid, I'm not going to lie.
What are they afraid of?
Change. Being irrelevant.
Just how AI can kind of upend how they operate.
Absolutely.
So are there any examples that you've seen or just examples, at Northwestern Mutual that you've experienced where people have really grasped it and kind of run to the change?
I think it just depends on how much you feel comfortable with technology, to be honest with you. And that's where I started, right? That's what MIT has given me is I'm not a coder, I'm not a programmer, but you've got to feel comfortable that technology is here to help you and propel you as a human being, as a society. The ones that actually believe in that are the ones that are actually going to move forward.
And then just looking forward, so I said at the top, it was just less than 2 years ago that ChatGPT launched. So thinking ahead to this conference, maybe in 2 years' time, what will we be talking about? What will have changed? What do you think is ahead for the next 24 months?
In terms of my predictions, there are a few, okay? One prediction is around customer expectations, which we're already starting to see. So this is not about hyper-personalization. Everybody talks about personalization, the holy grail. But, one of the things that I think we should start to think about is revenue generation, creating value when it comes to leveraging AI, which I don't see a whole lot of that. But just imagine a chatbot when you're traveling figures out in advance that your flight's going to get delayed and switches your flights for you. That would be huge for most of us who are traveling. Think about a financial institution that actually looks at your transactions and sees something weird happening with your spending history and, informs you ahead of time from a fraud perspective. Those are the kind of things clients and customers are going to expect. The other thing I think that ChatGPT has done is, with OpenAI, has created all of us as part of a worldwide focus group, right? And there's no real value proposition yet. We're all sort of trying to figure out what this means. But one of the things like the iPhone has done has changed the way we operate. It's a software and a hardware. What's missing with AI, I believe, is the hardware part of it. So I think AI with a hardware may change the way we think about it. That to me, and again, what do I know? That to me is probably something that could be game changing.
And let's just drill down into that issue of whether AI is really just kind of removing costs and is about efficiency versus revenue generation. You gave a few examples there of where it could be additive. It's not just replacing a task that may have been done by a human in the past, but is something that kind of creates fresh value, drives revenue for a company. Do you see any examples of that happening anywhere? Or are we just not there yet?
No, I see it happening in personalized recommendations. I mean, people are doing it, right? But it's on a very, very small scale. Think about developing products based on that, new products. I mean, we don't have to A/B test and create focus groups now. You've got all the customer data. You have all the purchasing patterns. Create products, design products on the fly with AI. I think that should be the next thing.
Okay. What haven't we talked about that you think everyone here should be hearing about?
She's almost tired of
Okay, sorry.
To us.
Well, there we go. That's a good time to close. Thank you, Aditi. It's been great to chat.
Thank you, and I'm here to learn too. I hope this was a little informative, but thank you for having both of us here. That's good.
Take care, man.